He signed up as James Cole. Intermediate level, 3 sessions. By the second run, Chloe knew he wasn't intermediate. She asked him directly. He smiled and said he just wanted to learn properly. She let it go. 3 weeks later, his mother walked into the lodge and called him Julian. The air in Aspen smelled like pine resin and money, and Chloe Marchetti had long since learned to tell the difference between the two. Pine resin was free. It drifted down from the mountains every morning, sharp and clean, the kind of smell that made you feel like the world was enormous and you were exactly the right size inside it. Money smelled like leather interiors and expensive cologne, and the particular brand of entitlement that arrived every winter season with the private jets and the fur-lined parkas and the people who tipped either extravagantly or not at all, depending on their mood and never on her performance. She was lacing up her boots outside the ski school office when the first charter of the season banked low over the valley, its belly catching the early light. December 1st. She watched it disappear behind the ridge and felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not dread exactly. More like the feeling before a big drop, when you're committed to the line and there's nothing left to do but go. Marchetti, her supervisor, Dave, leaned out of the office doorway with a clipboard. He was a former ski patrolman with a jaw like a boulder and the organizational instincts of someone who had spent 20 years telling panicking people what to do. You've got a private lesson at 9. Advanced booking, paid up front. Single client. Name. He looked at the clipboard. James Cole. She pulled her bootlace tight and stood. Level. Dave shrugged. Said beginner. She almost laughed. Private lessons paid her double rate, which meant that today, James Cole, whoever he was, would be subsidizing approximately a third of her December rent. She said a small, private thank you to the universe and went to meet him. He was waiting at the base of Ajax, standing with his hands in the pockets of a jacket that was technically ski wear, but had clearly never touched a mountain before today. It was the kind of jacket that came from a boutique rather than an outfitter, navy blue and immaculate, the tags removed, but the crease lines still visible where it had been folded in its box. He was tall, dark-haired, somewhere in his early 30s, and he was looking up at the mountain the way most people looked at an ocean for the first time, with that peculiar mixture of wonder and calculation, trying to understand the scale of a thing that refused to be scaled. James Cole, she said. He turned. She'd expected the usual, the practiced smile, the automatic once-over, the reflex charm of someone who was used to buying things. Instead, she got something else. He looked at her with a kind of careful attention, like he was actually registering her as a person rather than as a service. His eyes were dark, a brown so deep it was almost black in the flat morning light. That's me, he said. You must be my instructor. Chloe Marchetti. She offered her hand, and he shook it, firmly, without the alpha squeeze or the limp dismissal. Just a handshake. She filed this away. So, first time on skis. A beat of hesitation, barely perceptible. First time in a while, he said. I'm rusty. It wasn't quite a lie, she'd discover later, but it wasn't the truth either. For now she took him at his word, which was more than most people deserved and probably more than he did. She started him on the bunny slope, which was a gentle insult she delivered to every new client with such cheerful efficiency that most of them didn't realize they were being condescended to. She watched him snap into his bindings and immediately knew that he was not a beginner. His body found the stance without thinking, weight distributed correctly, knees flexed at the right angle. Beginners fought their own skis. This man and his skis had met before. She folded her arms and looked at him. He looked back at her with a flicker of something that might have been guilt. Rusty, she repeated. Very rusty, he said. There was the smile now, but it was a different kind than she'd anticipated. Not the automatic charm. Something more like an apology. She held his gaze for a long moment. She could have called him on it. She could have demanded an explanation or pointed out that she was being paid for something he didn't need. Instead, something made her let it go. Maybe it was the genuine quality of the apology in his smile. Maybe it was the way he was looking at the mountain, not like a man who wanted to conquer it, but like a man who needed it. All right, she said. Let's try something more interesting. She took him up the gondola and out onto one of the intermediate runs, a wide blue groomer that curved through the aspens in long, gentle arcs. She watched him ski, really ski, the rustiness dropping away after the first 100 meters until she was looking at someone who was technically skilled and physically confident, and somehow, underneath all of that, profoundly exhausted. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. Even coming down a mountain at speed, he carried something heavy. They stopped at the bottom, and she handed him a water bottle from her pack. "You're not a beginner," she said. "No. So why the story?" He looked at the mountain for a moment, the way he'd been looking at it all morning, like it was saying something he was trying to translate. "I didn't want anyone to know who I was," he said. "People treat you differently when they know who you are." She considered this. It was an odd thing to say, because it assumed that she would know who he was if she knew his real name, which she did not. James Cole. She filed it away again. "Well," she said, "for what it's worth, I don't know who you are. And you're a decent skier." Something in his face shifted. Not relaxed exactly, but settled, the way a room feels when someone finally opens a window. "Thank you," he said, and it came out sounding like he meant something larger than the compliment. They skied until noon, and she taught him nothing he didn't already know, but she did take him on lines he wouldn't have found on his own. Narrow corridors through the trees, a short boot path to a ridge with a view of the entire valley laid out below, a steep pitch that dropped sharply before opening into a wide bowl. He followed everything she did with an easy, athletic precision that made it almost feel like they were skiing together rather than a lesson, which was unusual, because usually she had to manage people, adjust for their fear and their overconfidence, and their varying relationships with speed. This man just skied. At the bottom she said, "Okay, lesson over." Then, because she couldn't quite help it, "You ever skied the back bowls?" He shook his head. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "Same time. We'll get into the interesting stuff." She wasn't entirely sure why she offered. She told herself it was because he was paying well, and she had the slot open anyway. She went home to her apartment. One bedroom, one window that looked at the parking structure across the alley instead of the mountains, a radiator that made a noise like a dying animal whenever the temperature dropped below 20, and she told herself that twice. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. By the third day, they weren't really doing lessons anymore. They were just skiing, and somehow between runs they were talking. He was careful at first, the way people are when they're used to being guarded, answering questions with other questions, or with the kind of smooth deflection that looks like openness. But the mountains had a way of getting under people's defenses. There was something about physical effort and cold air and the particular intimacy of a shared run through powder that stripped away the social varnish. She learned that he was from New York, though he didn't say what he did there. She learned that he had a younger sister named Lily who apparently meant a great deal to him, because whenever her name came up he got quiet in a way that was different from his other silences, not guarded, just careful, like he was protecting something fragile. She learned that he found most of his professional life exhausting and most of the people in it performing, and that he hadn't been truly cold in years because he was always somewhere climate-controlled, always in a meeting or a car or a hotel room with perfect temperature regulation, and that this specific cold, with the wind coming off the ridge and the thin air biting at the edge of his lungs, this felt real in a way that most of his life currently did not. She told him things too, more than she usually told clients, more than she'd meant to. She told him about growing up in Colorado, about her mother who had taught elementary school and her father who had worked ski patrol and died on the mountain when she was 16, a cardiac event on a Tuesday morning with no one but the pines to witness it. She told him that she'd become an instructor partly out of love and partly out of defiance, because the mountain had taken her father and she refused to be afraid of it, and that she could not imagine living anywhere that didn't have this kind of vertical drop, this specific relationship between earth and sky. She told him that she loved Aspen and hated Aspen in equal measure, because it was one of the most beautiful places on earth and also one of the most expensive, and that she spent a meaningful portion of her mental energy on rent math. He listened to all of this with his whole attention, which was more unusual than it should have been. On the fourth evening, she took him to a bar called the Marmot, which was not on any of the tourist lists and not visible from any of the main streets, and was reached by a narrow alley between a souvenir shop and a ski rental place. It had been there since the 70s and looked it, with wood paneling and a jukebox that worked and a bartender named Fitz who had 3 ex-wives and an encyclopedic knowledge of Colorado craft beer. The clientele was local, instructors, lift operators, patrollers, the people who actually ran the mountain as opposed to the people who visited it. Julian. She didn't know his real name yet, but she'd stopped thinking of him as James somewhere around day 2. sat at the bar, and looked around with the expression of someone who had found something they'd stopped believing existed. "What is this place?" he said. "This is where we go when we don't want to see anyone from work," she said. "The tourists never find it." "How do you find it?" "Someone who's been here longer shows you." She ordered them both beers from Fitz, who gave Julian a short, assessing look and apparently decided he was acceptable because he pulled the taps without asking questions. They stayed for 3 hours. They played pool badly, both of them, and she was delighted to discover that he was genuinely terrible at it in a way that had nothing to do with false modesty. He lost 4 games in a row and took it with a good humor that she found unexpectedly charming, laughing at himself with an ease that she hadn't seen in him anywhere else. The marmot, apparently, agreed with him. On the walk back to her car, she said, "You're different here." "Different from what?" She thought about how to say it. "Different from how you were the first morning." "On the first morning you were, I don't know." "Coiled up." He was quiet for a moment. The street was empty, snow starting to fall in small, feathery flakes that caught the amber of the streetlights. "I've been coiled up for a long time," he said. "I'd forgotten it was possible not to be." She looked at him sideways and felt something shift under her sternum. Not quite the heart drop of attraction, though that was part of it. Something quieter. The sensation of recognizing something. She drove home to the apartment with the parking structure view and lay in bed listening to the radiator and thought about the way he'd looked at the mountain that first morning. Like a man who needed it. She wondered what it was, exactly, that he needed it from. She'd find out soon enough. It was on the 6th day that everything rearranged itself. They were at the top of the mountain, waiting for the cloud cover to shift and reveal the back bowl they were planning to drop into. And Julian's jacket pocket buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He reached for it with the particular reluctance of someone who knew what they were going to find, glanced at the screen, and put the phone away with a careful, controlled motion that told her more than he probably intended. "Everything okay?" she said. "Fine." She let it go. They dropped into the bowl, and it was everything the mountain could be. A wide, untracked field of powder with the sun finally breaking through above them and the shadows of the aspens striped across the snow. And when they came out at the bottom, his face was flushed and bright, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the person she suspected he actually was underneath all the careful management. Later, in the gondola on the way up for a second run, his jacket fell from his lap, and when he bent to retrieve it, a laminated card slid out of the inner pocket and landed face up on the gondola floor between them. She picked it up without thinking and handed it back, and in the 2 seconds between picking it up and handing it back, she read the name on it. Julian Voss. Not James Cole. She sat with that for a moment. The gondola hummed upward. "Julian Voss," she said. He went very still. "I read your ID," she said. It was on the floor. A long silence. Below them the mountain fell away in sweeping white plains. "Yes," he said finally. "Julian Voss, as in Voss Hospitality Group." It wasn't a question. She'd recognized the name in the 2 seconds she'd had it. Everyone in the hospitality-adjacent service industry knew Voss Hospitality Group because they owned 17 hotels across North America, including the largest one in Aspen, the one at the top of Main Street with the glass atrium, and the sommelier, who had been profiled in 3 different magazines. "Yes," he said again. She looked at him. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Braced, she thought. Waiting for something. Waiting for the shift, probably. For her to become a different kind of person now that she knew who he was. She thought about it. She genuinely considered what she was feeling, which was mostly something like, "Well, that explains the jacket." "Why James Cole?" she said. He exhaled slowly. "James is my middle name. Cole was my grandfather's name." He looked at his hands. "I come here every year. Every year I'm recognized within 48 hours, and then everything is different. The people who were talking to me like a person start talking to me like an opportunity. I was just tired of it happening immediately." She thought about the way Fitz had served him without questions at the marmot. She thought about the way he'd looked at the mountain that first morning. She thought about his sister's name in his voice, careful and protective. "You could have told me," she said. "I know." He said it simply, without excuses. "When were you going to?" "I'm not sure I was," he admitted. Which is its own kind of answer. She was quiet. Outside the gondola, the mountain was doing what mountains did, indifferent and magnificent. She felt something pulling in 2 directions. The very reasonable observation that she'd been lied to, and the equally real recognition that what she knew about him now was the same as what she'd known about him yesterday and the day before, and on the first morning when he'd looked up at Ajax like it was saying something he needed to hear. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "I don't care about the money. I don't mean that in the way rich people say it when they mean the opposite. I mean that your money is genuinely not something I'm thinking about, and if it becomes something I'm thinking about, I'll tell you." He looked at her for a long moment. She met his eyes and held them. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Okay," he said again, and this time there was something in it. A decision, a landing. The gondola reached the top, and they got out into the cold, clean air, and she felt, very distinctly, that something had started. That night, she took him to see the mountain at midnight. It was technically against the rules and required knowing which access gate the patrollers didn't check after 10, knowledge she had accumulated over 11 years of working this mountain. They rode the snowmobile to a flat bench halfway up the ridge where the trees broke, and you could see the entire valley below. Aspen spread like a scattering of warm light against the dark, and above it the sky so thick with stars it looked structural. He stood beside her and didn't say anything for a long time. The cold was serious at this altitude, and she could see his breath in the moonlight. "My father built the first hotel," he said. "Then the second one. By the time I was born, there were 5. By the time I was old enough to understand what it meant, there were 11. He died 6 years ago and left all of it to me and my mother. But mostly to me, because she doesn't. She operates it. She manages it. But the creative decisions, the direction, the culture of the thing, that was supposed to be mine." He paused. "I'm not sure it's actually mine. I'm not sure I've ever made a decision about the business that wasn't effectively her decision." Chloe didn't say anything. She'd found, over years of skiing with strangers, that the mountain extracted things from people, and the best thing you could do was stay quiet and let it. "I have a meeting in New York in 3 weeks, he said. "After that, everything is supposed to be decided. The direction for the next decade. New properties, new partnerships. She has a very clear idea of what that looks like." He stopped again. "I came here because I wanted 3 weeks of being a person before I went back to being a Voss." The valley glittered below them. An elk crossed the snowfield at the edge of the trees, moving through the silver light with its unhurried, enormous grace. She reached over and took his hand. Just that. He looked down at their joined hands, and then up at her, and she felt the moment gather and break like a wave. They kissed in the cold and starlight with the valley spread below them and the elk already gone back into the forest, and it tasted like cold air and something that had been building for 6 days. And when they broke apart, he put his forehead against hers and breathed out slowly, like he was putting something down that he'd been carrying for a very long time. The weeks that followed were the kind of weeks that don't repeat. She knew that even as she was living them, knew it with the clear-eyed practicality of someone who had seen enough seasons come and go to understand what things lasted and what things were written in snow. She tried not to let the knowing diminish the living, and mostly she succeeded. They skied every morning, sometimes the whole day, going further into the backcountry as his confidence built. He was genuinely good, she realized, better than good. Somewhere in his past he'd put in the hours that made the body remember, and now with her lines to follow and the freedom of no one watching, he moved through the mountain with an ease that was almost startling. She felt something unashamedly proud whenever she watched him drop into a line she'd suggested. In the evenings they cooked in her apartment, which was absurd. A man worth several $100 million in a kitchen with a temperamental oven and a refrigerator that hummed at a frequency that drove her slightly insane. But he proved to be competent with pasta and alarmingly good with eggs, and entirely unfazed by the parking structure view. He brought wine that was too expensive and seemed embarrassed when she pointed it out. "I don't know how to buy cheap wine," he admitted. "I'll learn." "It's not that hard," she said. "You go to the grocery store and you look for the number between 8 and 15. He practiced. He got better. She showed him the non-tourist Aspen, the hiking trails that became ski tours in winter, the hot springs 2 valleys over, the independent bookstore on Hopkins where the owner knew her by name and kept titles aside for her when they came in. He bought too many books and had to ship them home to New York in a box, which she found unbearably endearing. She met his sister Lily by video call, which happened accidentally when he was FaceTiming her, and Chloe came in from the kitchen, and Lily immediately appeared delighted in the way younger sisters become delighted by anything that embarrasses their older brothers. Lily was 24, bright and funny, and she looked like a lighter version of Julian. The same dark eyes, but with more animation in them. There was a 4-line visible on her forearm during the call, and Julian noticed Chloe noticing and said afterward, quietly, that Lily had an autoimmune condition that required regular treatment and had for the last 4 years. She's okay, he said. She's good. She just needs consistent care. The medical expenses are significant. He said it the way people say things they've said so many times it's become fact, stripped of its terror by repetition. Chloe thought about the weight she'd seen in his shoulders that first morning on the mountain and felt it suddenly make sense. She didn't say any of this. She said, "She seems great." He smiled, and it was different from all his other smiles. "She's the best person I know," he said. Then the aircraft arrived, and everything shifted. She heard it before she saw it. The particular sound of a helicopter, not unusual in Aspen, but something about its confident, purposeful approach made her look up from where she was standing in the ski school queue on Wednesday morning. It descended toward the private pad near the Four Seasons with the unhurried certainty of something that had priority. She went back to her clients. She found out about Eleanor Voss that evening, when Julian came to her apartment with a bottle of wine in the 10 to 15 range that he'd clearly chosen himself, because the label was slightly crooked and he had the expression of someone who had accomplished something. Then he told her, and the expression changed. "My mother is here," he said. She processed this. "Here as in Aspen. Here as in the penthouse suite at the Voss property," he said. "With Victoria Ashworth." A pause. "Who is Victoria Ashworth?" He set the wine down on her counter. "Someone my mother has been proposing I marry for approximately 2 years. Her family runs an investment group that would complement our holdings. The merger would be significant." He said this with the flatness of a man reciting a prospectus. "Your mother proposed you marry someone." Proposed is a gentle word for it. She looked at him. He was standing in her kitchen with his coat still on, looking at the counter, and she saw again the thing she'd seen that first morning, the weight in the shoulders, the bracing. "She wants to meet you," he said. "She's going to insist on it. And if I don't bring you to meet her, she'll find another way to do it." He looked up. "I know this is a lot. I know this is the thing I was trying to get 3 weeks away from, and I've brought it here, which is not what I wanted." She thought about it for a moment. "What does this woman look like?" "My mother. This Victoria." He seemed taken aback by the question. "She's tall, blonde. She looks exactly like you'd expect someone named Victoria Ashworth to look." "And is she in love with you?" "No. We like each other well enough, and we both know what the arrangement would be." She absorbed this. She felt a range of things. The obvious one, the territorial animal response that she was embarrassed by, and felt anyway. And underneath it something cooler and more attentive, watching the situation rather than reacting to it. "When does she want to meet me?" she said. "There's a charity gala on Saturday," he said. "Black tie. She'll host." She nodded slowly. "All right. You don't have to." I said all right. She picked up the wine and looked at the label. It was a reasonable bottle from a Colorado winery she'd recommended to him. She felt a peculiar, tender fondness for the slightly crooked label. "I'll need a dress." The dress she found at a vintage outfitter on the edge of town, which required 2 hours of searching and the assistance of a woman named Greta who was 70 years old and had opinions. It was deep green silk, bias cut, from a previous decade but in a style that had presumably been elegant when it was made and was elegant still. It cost her $480, which was the largest single purchase she'd made in 2 years. She did not tell Julian this. The gala was held in the ballroom of the Voss Aspen property, which she passed every day on her way to work and had never entered. Inside it was as she'd imagined. High ceilings with industrial heritage metalwork that had been rendered luxurious by the application of significant money, ambient lighting that was warm enough to be flattering and curated enough to be intentional, flowers at every surface. "White," she noted, "everything white." And 100 or so people in formal were moving through the space with the specific social fluency of people who had attended events like this their entire lives. Julian met her at the entrance in a dark suit that fit him in a way that was clearly not off the rack, and when he saw her something happened in his expression that she decided to think about later. "You look," he started. "I know," she said, because she did look good, and she was not going to pretend otherwise as some kind of social nicety. "Let's go in." Eleanor Voss was 61 years old and had the kind of face that had been extraordinary in youth, and was now formidable, the bone structure asserting itself as the softness receded. She was in navy, which on her looked like a decision rather than a color, and she wore her silver hair in a configuration that required infrastructure. She turned to look at Chloe with an expression of perfect social welcome that Chloe recognized immediately as the expression of someone who has already made a decision and is now performing the appearance of an open mind. "Chloe," she said, with warmth that landed like a contract. "I've heard such interesting things." Beside Eleanor, Victoria Ashworth was exactly as Julian had described: tall, blonde, beautiful in a composed and immaculate way, wearing a dress that cost more than Chloe's rent. She smiled at Chloe with a smile that was not unkind, but that communicated, quite clearly and without a single word, that she understood the situation with complete clarity and found it more amusing than threatening. Chloe smiled back and felt the competitive animal stir in her chest and told it firmly to stay down. She made it through the first hour on sheer density of personality, which had always been her primary resource. She talked to the people who wanted to talk to her: a retired architect who was genuinely interesting, a documentary filmmaker who had shot a film in Nepal, a woman who bred horses and had opinions about snow that Chloe found oddly compelling. She ate the past hors d'oeuvres and drank one glass of wine with the measured pace of someone who understood that being slightly underdressed at a gala was one thing, and being slightly underdressed and wine-flushed was quite another. But Eleanor was subtle in ways that Chloe hadn't fully anticipated. It wasn't anything overt. It was the slight delay before introducing her, the position in conversations that placed her always slightly outside the circle, the comments that were not quite comments, observations that landed in the gap between compliment and condescension. "Your dress is so interestingly vintage. Julian tells me you love this mountain. How wonderful to have something so accessible as a passion." Victoria mentioned to someone that Chloe must have incredible stamina, working outdoors all winter, in a tone that transformed stamina from a compliment into a category. It was the kind of social management that left no fingerprints. You couldn't point to any single thing and say, "this." But by the end of the second hour, Chloe could feel it, the particular exhaustion of being someone's demonstration, of being held up next to a thing and found wanting. She found Julian near the window and said quietly, "I need some air." They stepped out onto the terrace. The mountain was dark above them, its outline visible against a sky with too many stars. The cold was immediate and bracing, and she was grateful for it. "How are you doing?" he said. "I'm fine." A pause. "Your mother is very good at what she does." He exhaled. "I know. She hasn't done anything I can point to. She's just making the picture," he said, "arranging the composition so that the right thing is obvious." "Yes. I grew up watching her do it." She looked at him. "Does it work? On you?" He looked back at her steadily. "Not anymore," he said. She found that she believed him. She also found that believing him was not entirely the same as being fine. Because she was standing on a terrace at a party she couldn't afford in a dress from a vintage outfitter while the woman inside arranged the composition, and she felt the particular chill that had nothing to do with the December air. He took her home, and she said she was tired, which was true. He stood at her door with his hands in his pockets and the look of someone who understood something and wasn't sure what to do with it. "Saturday was your mother's territory," she said. "Yes. I'd like you to come skiing tomorrow." "Mine." He smiled, and it was the marmot smile, the real one. "First gondola?" "First gondola," she confirmed. They skied for 6 hours the next day, leaving the groomed runs behind entirely, going deep into the trees and out the other side into a basin that didn't appear on any trail map and required a 40-minute traverse to reach. She watched him ski and felt her equilibrium return like blood flow after cold. She was almost herself again. Then Eleanor found a different lever. She came to the ski school. Chloe saw her from across the base area, navy coat, impractical heels for this terrain, an expression of purposeful grace. She dismissed her current clients with 5 minutes of gracious conversation that probably felt, to them, like a gift, and then she walked toward Chloe with the direction of someone who had done this particular thing many times. "I'd like to speak with you alone," she said, "if you'll allow it." Chloe said nothing. She inclined her head, which Eleanor appeared to take as consent. She had a car waiting on the access road. Of course she had a car waiting, and Chloe sat in the back seat of a black SUV with Eleanor Voss and listened to the engine run and waited. Eleanor opened a leather folio and removed several documents, which she placed on the seat between them with the care of someone who has rehearsed this. The Meridian Medical Foundation, she said. Perhaps Julian has mentioned it. He's mentioned that his sister requires medical care. The foundation administers Lily's treatment. It is privately funded. The primary funding source is the Voss Family Trust. A pause. The trust is controlled by me. Chloe looked at the documents. There were figures on them, treatment costs, funding schedules, projections. She didn't need to understand every line to understand the architecture. If Julian declines to enter the partnership arrangement with the Ashworth family, Eleanor said, I will be restructuring the trust's philanthropic allocations. The Meridian Foundation's funding will be discontinued. The car's heating system was excellent. Chloe was aware of this because she was cold anyway. That's Lily's treatment, she said. Her voice came out level. She was somewhat proud of this. It is, Eleanor agreed. Lily's condition is manageable with consistent care. Without it, the progression would be. The medical term is significant morbidity. A pause. Julian loves his sister very much. I know he does. He would sacrifice a great deal for her welfare. Eleanor gathered her documents with the same careful hands. I am telling you this because I think you are a practical woman, and I think practical women prefer information to uncertainty. Chloe looked out the window at the mountain. The sun was on the upper ridges, and it was very bright. What you're describing, she said, is a threat. What I'm describing, Eleanor said, is a context. She got out of the car without another word. She stood in the cold and watched the SUV pull away and felt, underneath everything, an almost clinical clarity, the feeling she got at the top of a serious run when there was no longer any choice to be made. She didn't tell Julian about the meeting that day. She didn't tell him the next day either. She cooked dinner and they watched a stupid movie on her laptop, and he fell asleep on her couch with his arm over his face and his socks on, and she sat beside him and looked at the familiar weight of him and felt the thing she was going to have to do crystallizing into something she couldn't look away from. She told him she needed to talk. She had planned this. She had planned it in the specific, detailed way she planned difficult runs. Every turn, every commitment point, every place where she might want to bail and would not. She sat across from him at her kitchen table, and she told him that she'd been thinking. About us, she said. He looked at her. I think we both got swept up. The mountain and the snow and the whole situation. She could hear the words coming out of her mouth, and they sounded like what she'd intended them to sound like, which was to say they sounded true enough to pass. But I'm a ski instructor in Aspen, and she gestured, meaning all of it, the hotel empire and the helicopters and the folio of documents. And I think I've been playing a role that isn't actually mine. That's not what this is, he said. His voice was flat. I have an ex, she said. Marco. He's a patroller here. We've been in and out for years. I think that's probably more my speed. This was the lie, the specific lie she'd chosen because it was specific and verifiable, and because Marco was real and had been texting her for the last month. She hated using him for this, and she would apologize to him privately later. Julian was looking at her with a stillness that was worse than any argument. You're lying, he said. I'm not. You are. No heat in it, just certainty. She held his gaze and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer, but he couldn't prove it. He left. He walked out of her apartment without another word, and she sat at her kitchen table in the quiet and put her hands flat on the surface and breathed. The radiator made its dying animal noise. She thought about Lily with the 4-line visible on her forearm, bright and funny on a video call, looking like a lighter version of her brother with more animation in her eyes. She went to bed. She did not sleep. He stopped coming to the ski school. She heard, through the particular small-town information network of a resort community, that he was spending his days at the hotel, that he'd been seen at dinner with Victoria Ashworth and Eleanor Voss, that the helicopter had not left yet, so presumably he had not. She skied alone, which was what she'd been doing before him and would go on doing after, and she told herself that this was fine because it was true. She'd been fine before, she'd be fine again. She did the difficult lines without an audience and came home to the apartment with the parking structure view and read books, and did not think about the bookstore on Hopkins Street where the owner would probably be holding 2 titles for him that he'd now never pick up. She was in the middle of managing all of this when Fitz called her. He called her on a Thursday afternoon, which was unusual, Because Fitz expressed most human communication in person and at the bar. That friend of yours, Fitz said. He's not, she started. Don't, Fitz said. I'm too old. Your friend. His name is actually Julian Voss. A pause. Yes. I looked him up after you stopped bringing him in. A pause from Fitz. He runs a hotel company. He does. He was in here last night, Fitz said. Alone. Sat at the bar for 2 hours. Didn't drink much. Just Saturday. Another pause. He didn't look great, Chloe. She stared at the wall of her apartment. I don't know what's going on between you two, and I'm not asking, Fitz said. I'm just reporting. She thanked him and hung up and stood in her kitchen for a moment. Then went to get her coat. Then took her coat off and hung it back up. Then stood in the kitchen again. She was still standing there when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. It said, I know what my mother said to you. She stood very still. Then, I heard them arguing. Victoria and my mother, in the hallway outside the suite. Victoria said she didn't want a husband who'd been maneuvered into it. She said exactly what my mother had done. All of it. But that's not important. Then, I know what she threatened. I know why you said what you said. She sat down on the floor. This wasn't planned behavior. It was just that her legs did it without consulting her. The phone buzzed again. I've sorted out the financial piece independently. There's a medical trust one controlled directly, separate from the family foundation, that I'd set up years ago as a contingency. Lily's treatment is covered regardless of what my mother does. A pause. And then, I should have told you that sooner. I should have told you a lot of things sooner. I'm sorry. And then, I know you're at the mountain. The back bowl. I'm going there now. If you don't want to see me, I'll ski down, and that's fine. But I'd like to see you. She was already standing before she finished reading it. She drove to the mountain with both hands on the wheel and her heart doing something uncomfortable, and she tried to think practically about this, tried to apply the same cold assessment she'd given it before. The situation hadn't changed in the ways that mattered. He was still Julian Voss, and she was still Chloe Marchetti with a parking structure view. The systems that Eleanor Voss operated did not change because one financial mechanism had been neutralized. The gulf of worlds was not bridged by a text message and a separate medical trust. She parked and got out and stood at the base of the mountain and looked up. The thing was, she thought, that the mountain didn't care about any of that. The mountain was a mountain. You skied it, or you didn't, and it continued either way. She went up. She found him where she expected to find him. The bench on the ridge where they'd come that first night, the one with the view of the valley. He'd earned his way there, which meant he'd hiked the last section on foot with his skis on his back, which was not a small thing, and he was standing at the edge of the bench looking out when she came up over the final slope and stopped. He turned. He looked, she thought, exactly like someone who had not slept. His hair was slightly wrong, and there were shadows under his eyes, and his jacket was the original navy one from the first day, which she noticed because she'd noticed it then. You hiked up, she said. I knew you'd be here. You could have just, she stopped. She'd been about to say texted, but he had texted, and she was here, so the argument defeated itself. He walked toward her across the flat snow of the bench, stopping a few feet away. Below them the valley was already in shadow, the light lingering only on the highest peaks, and the sky above was doing the thing it did at altitude in winter, going from blue to indigo with an impossible depth. I should have told you about the independent trust from the beginning, he said. It would have changed everything. Maybe, she said. But that's not. She stopped again, because she was finding it difficult to make sentences right now, which was unusual for her. She was good at sentences. They were one of her more reliable tools. The trust is one piece, she said. Your mother is still who your mother is. Yes. The life you have is still what it is. Most of it, he said, though I've been reconsidering some of it. She looked at him. He said it carefully, the way he said things he'd thought about for a long time. I've been in meetings with my lawyers, he said. Since Tuesday. I've been separating what I actually own from what is controlled through the family trust. It's complicated, and some of it I'll lose, and some of it I won't. But the core of it, the part that's actually mine, is substantial. Julian, I'm not telling you this to. I'm not using money to fix this. I'm trying to tell you that the constraint you thought existed, the one my mother presented to you as definitive, was not the whole picture. That's all. She was quiet. The sky above was darker now, the first stars appearing. She told me about the meeting, she said. Victoria? She told me over dinner. She was I think she was trying to make a point to my mother about transparency. It backfired. A pause, for which I am genuinely grateful. Chloe looked out at the valley for a moment. The lights of Aspen were coming on below, the familiar scatter of them, and she thought about all the winters she'd watched this happen. The valley going from white daylight to amber evening, over and over, season after season, with the mountain impassive above it all. I said some things, she said, that weren't true. I know. I used Marco. I know. I don't hold it against you. It was still wrong, she said. I should have talked to you. You were protecting Lily. That wasn't my decision to make. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. It wasn't. But I understand why you made it. He looked at her. I would have done the same. The wind came off the ridge, light and cold, carrying a few loose crystals of snow. She felt them on her face and thought about the first time they'd been up here, the elk crossing the moonlit field below, his forehead against hers. Your mother is going to be a problem, she said. Indefinitely. Probably. That doesn't resolve. No, he agreed. It doesn't. She looked at him. He looked back at her without flinching, without offering her the easy reassurance, without performing the confidence that he did not entirely feel. This was the thing about him, she thought, that had gotten her in the first place. He didn't pretend. I'm giving a press conference on Friday, he said. In Aspen. My mother has arranged it to announce the partnership with the Ashworths. He paused. I'm going to say some things at it that she will not expect. She felt something move through her. Julian. I've thought about it. The lawyers are involved. The financial separation I mentioned is already in motion and will be more or less complete before Friday morning. There will be fallout. There will be an argument. There have already been arguments. His voice remained steady. But I would like to say what I have to say on my own terms, with my own face, where people can see it. A pause. I've been a boss in private for 33 years. I'd like to try something else. What's something else? He looked at her. Whatever this is, he said. Whatever is actually mine. She stood on the mountain in the cold and the gathering dark and felt the wind and the altitude and the particular weight of someone looking at you like you are something they have chosen, not something they've inherited or performed or optimized for. She said, I want to be clear that I'm not a person who can be resolved into a life I don't recognize. I know, he said. Aspen, the mountain, this specific life. I'm not asking you to leave it. What are you asking? He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that means someone is being careful because the thing they're about to say matters. I'm asking if I can stay in it, he said. For a while? And we see. The simplicity of it caught her off guard. Not a grand gesture, not a declaration. Just, can I stay? We see. She thought about the first day, the bunny slope, the jacket with the crease lines from the box. She thought about the pool table at the Marmot and his losing 4 games with genuine good humor. She thought about him in her kitchen with the slightly crooked label wine he'd chosen himself, and Lily laughing on the video call, and the elk crossing the moonlit field. You should know, she said, that the view from my apartment is a parking structure. He blinked. What? My apartment? The window looks at the parking structure across the alley. I don't have a mountain view. I've never had a mountain view. I should have said this earlier. He stared at her for a moment, and then something broke open in his face. The real smile. The Marmot smile. The one she'd been missing for the last week like a missing tooth. And he laughed. It was a real laugh, a startled one. And it went up into the dark sky and the cold air took it, and she found herself smiling back with everything she had. I don't care about the view, he said. Just so we're aligned. I am extremely aligned, he said. On the parking structure. She crossed the space between them, and he met her halfway, which she thought afterward was the most accurate possible description of the whole thing, and he held her in the middle of the bench on the ridge with the valley going dark below and the stars coming in above, and she turned her face against his shoulder and felt the particular weight of someone you have missed for a week that felt much longer. The press conference, she said against his jacket. Friday. I'll come. He held her tighter for a moment, just a moment, and then they were apart, and she was looking at him in the fading light. We should go down before it's dark, she said. Before it's dark, he agreed. They skied down together, and she watched him ahead of her on the final run, moving easily through the last of the evening light with his weight centered and his hands relaxed, and she thought, this is the thing about mountains. You learn a run by skiing it, by knowing where the ice hides and where the powder holds and where the pitch goes steep before you expect it. You can't know a run from a map or a description or anyone else's account of it. You have to go down yourself. The press conference was in the atrium of the Voss Aspen Hotel, which Chloe had still never entered until now. It was as she'd imagined, the industrial heritage metalwork and the ambient light and the general impression of significant money made architecturally manifest. About 40 people were present, journalists, hotel PR representatives, several individuals who had the particular air of investment professionals. And at the front of the room, Eleanor Voss stood with Victoria Ashworth and two other people Chloe didn't recognize, arranged on a small raised platform with a microphone and a display screen showing the Voss Hospitality Group logo. Chloe stood at the back in her regular clothes and watched Eleanor scan the room and find her, and for one precise second, Eleanor's expression did something before the control came back. Julian was not on the platform. He came in through a side door at 11 o'clock on the dot, which was the time the press conference was scheduled to begin, and walked directly to the front of the room with the specific purpose of someone who has made a decision and is on the other side of making it. He wore no jacket, just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled at the cuffs, and he looked better than he had on the ridge, rested, which was interesting because she knew the week he'd had. Eleanor said something to him, quietly, with her professional smile maintained for the cameras. He nodded and turned to the microphone. "Good morning," he said. "Thank you for coming. I want to take a moment before we begin to address something." Eleanor's smile didn't move. She was very good. "There has been some expectation," Julian said, "that this conference would announce a formal partnership between the Voss Hospitality Group and the Ashworth Investment Group, and a personal arrangement that was to accompany it." He paused. 40 people in the room got very still. "That announcement will not be happening." He spoke for perhaps 5 minutes. He did not perform. He did not accuse. He described, in measured and precise language, the nature of the arrangement that had been presented to him and to others, the mechanism by which his family's philanthropic funding had been used as leverage, and his own decision to separate his personal holdings and professional direction from the family trust structure effective this week. He thanked his legal team. He said that he wished Victoria Ashworth and her family well, and that he respected her enough not to ask her to enter an arrangement built on coercion. He said that the Voss Hospitality Group would continue under new leadership, which was to say under his own leadership and without arrangements he had not chosen. Eleanor stood through all of it with the expression of a woman who is deciding in real time what she is going to do about something. Chloe watched her and felt, not for the first time, a reluctant admiration for the sheer structural integrity of the woman. At the end, Julian said, "The things worth having are not for sale and cannot be leveraged. That's probably the main thing." He stepped back from the microphone. The room took a moment to understand that it was over. There was a scattering of questions, which the PR team managed. Julian walked toward the back of the room with the contained energy of someone on the other side of a drop, and when he reached Chloe, he stopped and looked at her with a question in his expression. She said, "That's probably the main thing." He exhaled, and something in his face went simple. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I thought so." Eleanor Voss left the building before the questions were finished. Chloe watched her go and thought that Eleanor would regroup and Eleanor would find other levers, and the situation with Julian's family was not resolved by one press conference and probably would not resolve for a long time. She thought that she understood this and that it did not change the accounting. Outside the hotel, the sun was bright on new snow. Julian fell into step beside her on the sidewalk, and they walked without saying anything for a while, which had always been one of the things she found easiest about him. "What happens now?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I have approximately 40 years of professional rebuilding to do," he said, "and I'd like to do some of it here. In Aspen. There's a property on the east side," he said. "Small, nothing like the Voss portfolio. I've been looking at it for 2 days. It's been operating as a guest ranch, and the infrastructure is good, but it needs a complete program overhaul." A pause. "I think it wants to be a small ski school." She stopped walking. He stopped a step later and turned to look at her. "A ski school," she said. "With a strong backcountry component," he said. "An instruction by someone who knows where the unmarked runs are." She looked at him for a long moment. The sun was doing what it did in Aspen, hitting the snow at an angle that made everything brilliantly, unreasonably beautiful, and she squinted into it and thought about all the things this was, absurd and serious, and something that would require an enormous amount of work and also something that was, at the core of it, simple. "You'd need a head instructor," she said. "I was hoping," he said, carefully, "to discuss that with someone I know." She was quiet for a moment longer. Then she said, "The parking structure isn't going anywhere. It's going to be there all winter. I understand. We should start with a trial period," she said. "For the professional arrangement." "Absolutely. And the personal one." "That too," he said, though his expression suggested that he considered the personal trial period more or less academic. She thought he was probably right about that. She'd thought so since somewhere around day 2, if she was being honest, which she had always preferred to be. "Come on," she said. "I'll buy you coffee. There's a place the tourists never find." They walked together in the December sun down the main street of Aspen, which was full of people in expensive outerwear and the smell of pine resin coming down from the mountains, and she thought, this specific morning, this specific cold, this specific person beside her. She had stood at the top of enough serious runs to know the feeling of a good line. The moment before the drop, when everything is committed and the mountain opens, and all you have to do is go. She went. The spring came slowly that year, the way it always did at altitude, hesitant at first, then suddenly decisive, like someone who had been considering a difficult thing for a long time. The snow retreated to the upper peaks, and the aspens went from bare silver to that particular new green, the kind of green that existed only in those first weeks, transparent and luminous, like the mountain was lit from inside. By April, the east side property had a name, Ridge and Route, which had been Chloe's suggestion after Julian's first 3 options proved to be various degrees of too expensive sounding, and a contractor, and a program outline that was currently living on her kitchen table under a coffee mug and 2 months of annotated trail maps. The Voss Hospitality Group was navigating its restructuring with the assistance of a board that had, it turned out, been more sympathetic to Julian's position than Eleanor had allowed him to know. Eleanor herself had retreated to New York and had not, as yet, accepted any of Julian's calls, which he dealt with by leaving voicemails and waiting, the way you waited for difficult terrain to become navigable. Lily came to visit in late June, when the mud season had finally released its grip and the mountain had reopened for summer hiking and the aspens were in full leaf, shimmering silver green in the afternoon wind. She arrived on a commercial flight, to Chloe's privately noted approval, with a single rolling suitcase and an expression of delighted impatience that Chloe recognized immediately as the face of someone who had been hearing about a place for months and had finally arrived to judge for themselves. She stood in the doorway of the apartment with the parking structure view and looked around with bright, assessing eyes. "He said the window was terrible," she said. "He's correct," Chloe said. "He said you didn't mind." "I don't." Lily considered this and apparently found it satisfactory. She dropped her bag on the couch and looked at Chloe with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who had decided to like you and was simply confirming the decision. "He's happy," she said. "I didn't know he could look like that. Like, relaxed. Like he's not running calculations." Chloe thought about him in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning, making eggs with the particular focused calm he brought to everything domestic, which was slightly too much focus for eggs, but which she found endearing. She thought about the way he skied now, with no one watching, no lesson structure, just the mountain and the line. "He's learning to stop running calculations," she said. Lily smiled. It was Julian's smile, the real one, the marmot one. "Good teacher," she said. "Working on it," Chloe said. "We both are." They took her to the marmot that evening, all 3 of them, and Fitz served them without ceremony, and Lily played pool and won 3 out of 4 games against Julian, which he took with the same unself-conscious good humor that had gotten Chloe in the first place. And at some point late in the evening, Chloe looked across the bar at him laughing at something his sister had said, lit by the amber warmth of the oldest bar in Aspen, and felt a feeling that had no edge to it. No calculation, no bracing, just the clear, simple weight of a thing that was real. Outside, the mountain stood over the town the way mountains stand over things, in the dark and the cold, and the permanent indifference of things that don't need anything from you to keep being magnificent. The snow on the upper peaks was retreating slowly, the bare rock appearing in patches, and by summer the whole ridgeline would be exposed, and they would hike it, as she had promised him, with the valley below and the sky enormous above. For now the night was cold, and the bar was warm, and through the window the alley was silver with the light off the parking structure across the street, and she thought, this. All of it. The crooked wine labels, and the bad pool, and the radiator that made a noise like a dying animal, and the bookstore on Hopkins Street, and the midnight rides, and the starlight over the valley. The specific texture of a life that was hers, and the man in it who had looked at the mountain like it was saying something he needed to hear, and had stayed long enough to hear it. She went back inside,